Welcome to the Tiger's Den. This is the voice of Cheryl, and I am Toothless Tiger. Well, the question is, do you know? Do you know about the Voting Rights Act of 1965? If not, let me enlighten you. It is voting time, and a lot of us have gone and cast our votes, and some are yet to cast their votes in different states. But I'd just like to share this with you. I thought it was pretty interesting. I found it online under Legal Dictionary, and it was written April 17th, 2019 by the content team. And under fair use, I want to present it to my audience. The meaning of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was to prohibit racial discrimination in voting. For example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 received 5 revisions from Congress to ensure that no one could discriminate against voters because of their race. The act secured the right to vote for American minorities, enforcing those rights protected by the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. To explore this concept, consider the following: Voting Rights Act of 1965 definition. Definition of Voting Rights Act of 1965. Noun, number 1, a federal law guaranteeing American minorities the right to vote free from racial discrimination. Origin, August 6, 1965. What is the Voting Rights Act of 1965? The purpose of the Voting Rights Act was to guarantee that minorities in the U.S. could vote without having to worry about racial discrimination. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the act into law during the peak of the civil rights movement. Congress later made 5 amendments to the act to expand the protections it could offer to minority Americans. According to the Department of Justice, the Voting Rights Act is the most effective civil rights law the U.S. has ever passed. Isn't that amazing? I added that line. History of the Voting Rights Act. The history of the Voting Rights Act dates to the creation of the Constitution itself. Initially, in the early days of the history of the Voting Rights Act, the Constitution left the decision of voter qualifications entirely up to the states. However, Southern states repeatedly tried to exclude racial minorities from elections by way of fraud and acts of violence. Once the 1950s rolled around, the civil rights movement put pressure on the federal government to strengthen their efforts to protect the minority vote. In 1957, Congress passed a law allowing the Attorney General to sue on behalf of those who experienced a violation of their 15th Amendment rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 created further protections by allowing federal courts to appoint referees to monitor those jurisdictions known for participating in voter discrimination. While these laws helped give the courts more power to punish those who violated federal voting rights, they still weren't enough. That's why the history of the Voting Rights Act ultimately led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Introduced to Congress 2 days before civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. led a march of 25,000 people from Selma, Alabama to the state capital of Montgomery, chanting, "We shall overcome." Drafting the bill, When it came to drafting the bill, Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, a Democrat, and Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen, a Republican, both worked with Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach to get the bill's language just right. Mansfield and Dirksen received the support of 64 additional senators who agreed to co-sponsor the bill, with 46 being Democrats and 24 Republicans. However, the process of drafting the bill did not end here, not by a long shot. As the bill progressed, legislators discovered they needed to make many amendments to the act. For one thing, some legislators believed the bill unfairly targeted jurisdictions in the South. Then Senator Ted Kennedy led the effort to amend the bill to prevent poll taxes. After much debate, President Lyndon B. Johnson noticed the act did not prohibit most forms of discrimination in voting. He then gave further instructions to Attorney General Katzenbach with regard to drafting the bill, telling him to draft the toughest possible Voting Rights Act he could draft. This led to the act as Americans know it today. Amendments to the act. Ultimately, there were 5 amendments to the act that served to strengthen the protections it offered the American citizens. The first of the amendments to the act were those which Congress made to Section 5 in 1970 and 1975, allowing the U.S. Supreme Court more of a broad interpretation of the act. The most recent of the amendments to the act occurred in 2006, when Congress eliminated the provision regarding voter examiners. Voting examiners registered voters, monitored elections, and supervised jurisdictions found to have engaged in racial discrimination before. All of these examples of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 amendments turned out to be necessary in that the act still had a while to go from its inception to the powerhouse it eventually became. Provisions of the Act. The Voting Rights Act is rather comprehensive, with the provisions of the Act being rather numerous. The 1982 Senate Judiciary Committee report outlines some of the more general provisions of the Act. Courts rely on these provisions in trying to decide whether a jurisdiction's election law violates the general ban on prejudice voting laws. Some of those general provisions of the article of the Act include the degree to which elected officials have failed to respond to the concerns of minority groups, whether a candidate has obvious or subtle race-related appeals in his or her campaign, the history of discrimination in that jurisdiction which may affect its citizens' right to vote. And lastly, the extent to which the jurisdiction's minorities have suffered discrimination in areas like education, employment, and health. Literacy tests. Literacy tests were a cruel method used to force Black people out of voting booths. For instance, election officials would often make Black people take literacy tests in order to vote. They did this knowing that the Black population was largely denied a quality education and therefore suffered from a high rate of illiteracy. The officials then denied those who failed the literacy tests the opportunity to vote. Going a step further, voting officials in the southern states would often force Black voters to either recite for them the entire Constitution or explain the most complicated sections of state laws. Most white voters could not even do this, and naturally, White voters were not required to undergo any type of testing at all. In some instances, election officials would even deny blacks with college degrees the right to vote because they could not meet this draconian requirement. These are Voting Rights Acts of 1965, examples of the kinds of cruel prerequisites to voting that the law ultimately quashed. Effects of the Voting Rights Act. The effects of the Voting Rights Act were immediate. For one thing, by the end of 1965, 250,000 black voters had registered to vote. By the end of the following year, 1 year later, only 4 of the 13 southern states had less than 50% of their black citizens registered to vote. The effects of the Voting Rights Act are downright impressive. In March of 1965, the gap between white and black voters was at its highest in Mississippi at 63.2 by November of 1988. That gap had shrunk to a measly 6.3. Even Virginia, the state with the lowest gap between white and black voters, saw significant effects of the Voting Rights Act, with the gap shrinking from 22.8 in March of 1965 to only 4.7 in November of 1988. These are true Voting Rights Act of 1965 examples of the good that particular piece of legislation had done for U.S. citizens. Voting Rights Act of 1965 example involving parts of the act itself. Perhaps the most important example of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is Shelby County v. Holder, 2013. This case trumps other Voting Rights Act of 1965 examples because it became a landmark court case concerning the constitutionality of 2 provisions of the Voting Rights Act. Here, Shelby County, Alabama, sued the United States Attorney General, arguing that Section 4B and 5 of the Act were unconstitutional. Shelby also sought a permanent injunction against the enforcement of these 2 provisions. What is important to note is that Section 5 originally had a shelf life of 5 years, but legislators had continued to renew it all along. The district court upheld the provisions, finding that evidence presented to Congress in 2006 was enough to justify that the sections as constitutional. Shelby County appealed, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit affirmed. U.S. Supreme Court. When the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, the court had to decide whether Congress overstepped its boundaries in renewing Section 5 under the restrictions of Section 4B. Ultimately, the court decided that yes, it had gone beyond its authority. The court held that Section 4 was unconstitutional because it imposed burdens that were otherwise no longer conducive to the climate of the voting districts in question. The court added that while Section 4 made more sense in the 60s and 70s, it was no longer relevant in 2013, and for it to continue on as it had been doing was unconstitutional, said the court in its own words. Of course, in any polity that features majority rule, some people are bound to be outvoted on an issue or a candidate and thus to lose. On that round of the ongoing political game, such losses are a necessary function of any system requiring less than unanimity, which would be hopelessly impractical. And in an open society that allows people freely to form associations and to design those associations, some people obviously will be members of associations whose representatives from time to time express in their name opinions they do not share. But that again is a necessary function of having associations free to adopt a structure that empowers their leaders to speak with less than unanimous backing. But the implied they of number 5 is not a polity in itself, nor is it an association freely created by free citizens. Quite the reverse. It is a group constructed artificially by the mandate of Congress, entirely on the lines of race or ethnicity. On what authority has Congress constructed such groups? Purportedly, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, but that says that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It is hard to imagine language that could more clearly invoke universal individual rights. It is citizens who are protected, and they are protected from any denial of their rights that might be based on the specified group characteristics, race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The members of Congress who launched the amendment said, Senator Willard Warner professed to give to each individual an equal share of political power. Citation omitted. And the related legal terms and issues that they found were fraud, the definition of fraud, a false representation of fact, whether by words, conduct, or concealment intended to deceive another. Injunction, a court order preventing an individual or entity from beginning or continuing an action. And poll tax, a tax levied on every American adult without considering a person's individual income or resources. So, there goes the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, what I found very interesting is they used the word minority as they were relating to us, because in case you didn't know it, we're the only group of people that don't have the right freely to vote every time a vote comes up, because Congress has to go back and consider if we deserve the right to vote, which I think in 2022 is absurd. I don't know how you guys feel about it. And if you didn't know about it, now you might want to give that some thought. You know, we always talk about being together and making things better, but we have to make things better where they count. And since everyone wants to count our vote, then we are going to have to do better about finding out how to make that happen. And the word minority, as it is defined in the Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, revised 4th edition, page 1149, reads as follows: minority, the state or condition of a minor, infancy, the smaller number of votes of a deliberative assembly opposed to majority. which see. So when you think about minority and the definition in law and how it's used in law, then you see we as a people, the black people they call us, black, which means you're civilly dead in the eyes of the law. We are infants, we're minors, and decisions have to be made for us. I think we need to start thinking individually. How does that affect me daily? How does that affect my family? How can I change the way I'm viewed in law? Not necessarily by other people, but by a system that keeps me exactly where I've been ever since they invaded our land and us as a people. And I use the word hegemony a lot because I don't believe in racial discrimination. Although I did when I was a kid because I didn't know any better. And I did when I was an adult because I didn't know any better. But once I started on my journey, who were we before we were slaves? And boy, that road there, it's a bumpy road. It's a lot to learn. But I do my best to learn how to live in today's contemporary times, learning about us ancient and up to now, and how to live peaceably with all men today. So if you go to the Edamon line, and it's free, you can download it. You see the word hegemony is a noun, and they started using it around 1560s. So that means that the word didn't exist before then. That's when it started. And according to their dictionary, the word is the dominance or leadership of one social group or nation over others. Henry Black's dictionary definition of hegemony is the leadership of one among several independent Confederate states. So there you have it. I hope you have enjoyed learning about the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 and just learning about how voting is used against us. And what I mean by using against us, we tend to be the people that are less likely to financially support our candidates. And if you listen to that definition, the lower in number in an assembly of voters, then our people are going to always be outnumbered. So they have to make alliances with others to get them to, sign off on a bill that they may be proposing. So in order for them to do anything for our interests, we as a people have to learn to put our money where our mouth is. We need to start supporting the people that are trying to represent us as a people. And I do know that all skin folk ain't kinfolk. We understand that. But we understand in this system, the fiat dollar that is now turning into the digital dollar, it talks and it speaks volumes. And you can tell that by the behavior of people and what they're willing to do for it. So we must start supporting the people that we say that we want to represent us and then hold them to account. And if they don't do what our dollars dictate that they do, then we need to get them out and put someone there that will. Dr. Claude Anderson worked in many political offices and in a couple of presidential administrations. And he's a renowned, I think they call them economists. And, he tells us all the time how we have to do this thing. You can check him out on YouTube. Dane Calloway is another good one that you can check out on YouTube. And check him out on his voting video, because he told us the real reason they gave us the right to vote, and that was to take our land. There are so many hidden secrets that are open wide, and we don't see them because our eyes are shut. And that reminds me of open shut eyes. Things are right before us, but we don't see them. And we've been taught to hate each other and to compete against each other, so that rarely will we listen. But I ask you not to take my word for it. Just do like I did and research. It is really written for us to know. And I encourage you, even if you don't want to know who we were before we were slaves, if none of that interests you, just start asking yourself some questions. And then when you ask yourself, ask Google and see if it tells you anything. When you go and search for a video on YouTube, ask YouTube. There are some great videos that are out there. And a lot of it is confusing. So you have to work on who you are and what you're going to stand for and what you believe and what you know. And then listen with an open mind and an open ear. I used to wouldn't do that. I had tunnel vision. And what I said and what I believed, that's all that mattered. Unfortunately, that is not true. And I can stand in that, knowing that it is not true. I can admit to that. I can even apologize to people, and I have, that I had that dogmatic attitude with. But I do know this today, that law begins and ends with me. And I do know that I'm responsible for knowing it. I do not practice law as an attorney. I do not give legal advice. I am not a psychiatrist or a therapist. Yet I am all of that, they say, in Christ Jesus. That's what their system says. And then if you operate in the gift that you've been given, just with your voice, by speaking truth, comforting words, you're held responsible. Well, I am responsible for my words, and I take full accountability for my actions. I was taught to keep the peace with all men, for as much that lie within me, and that's what I attempt to do. It is not easy, and it does not always happen. But if you encounter me, I come in peace. And I come with a lot of opinion, but I come in peace. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you for entering the Tiger's Den. I'm getting ready to leave the Tiger's Den. But I want to share with you, before I go, my merchandise. Because I do have merchandise. And if you're interested, I'd like for you to check it out. And that is a mask and my journal for Annie's babies. I think I'm going to start doing an Annie's baby series, and we're going to just talk about the family and the dynamics, our experiences, and how we made it. I'm going to have guests to give their stories, their experience, and I'm going to do it live. I haven't decided what day, what hour, I try to work within the confines of what seems to be the unwritten or unspoken rules of time so that, we don't all overlap each other on YouTube. But one thing I found is that you're going to have people that support you no matter what, and you're going to have people that are not. You're going to have some people that join the live, and you're going to have some that just want to go back and watch the replay. And however it goes for me, I'm going to indulge and I'm going to be happy. I'm grateful for everyone that takes the time to listen to me, and I certainly appreciate you guys for the kind words, more than you'll ever know, in my comments. I thank everybody who think enough of me and the work that I do to send me a Cash App. I can't thank you enough. And for those of you who support me and have bought merchandise, thank you. That's what the Amy Babies t-shirt looks like. And that is Healing the Womb Man Inside t-shirt. One day I'll have a live for that as well. And of course, that's my famous signature Fuck Them Teeth Toothless Tiger t-shirt. I wear mine proudly. For I am Toothless Tiger. And that's the Toothless Tiger Fuck Them Teeth journal. Right now they're in small sizes, but I'm going to get them in the large size, which is, it's like maybe close to like a 5x7. Right now they're a little above a 4.6. And those are the Stack Deck t-shirts. And these t-shirts is for the people who say that we're always playing the race card. And I say that if I'm playing the race card, then you're playing the other 53 stacked against me. And that's the Stack Deck collection. And you can use that for anything, not just race. It's just people who play the gender card, They play the man or the woman card. So many cards that people are playing these days. You kind of get a little confused. And that's just a t-shirt that we offer. We built this joint for free. And that's how it looks with your jeans and shoes and mask, which we're getting away from the mask, but some people can't let them go. And that's the Stargate. And that's the gifted, it's the womb that carried you. And I now have keychains, and I have coffee mugs. I have personal candles. So I have several items. And if you're interested, just email me. Also, remember, if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, and I've said that so much, and the Henry Black's Law Dictionary Revised 4th Edition PDF files, all you have to do is hit my email, toothlesstiger7@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to send you a copy. On that note, I want to thank everybody again. I certainly want to try to promote some of the YouTubers that are like myself. We haven't quite gotten there to monetization. Some of us haven't reached our 1,000. And so I would just ask for you to check their pages out. Andre O.D. Kimball, check his page out. Refuse to Lose BTS, check her page out. Tough Love, check his page out. We have a few people out here that's trying to do something to uplift our people, and we don't get a lot of traffic, and that's okay. It's okay. But we're going to be here sharing our life experiences and our stories, and helping who we can, how we can. And if you're interested in joining or listening or learning, then please join us. We would greatly appreciate it. I met some great people along the way. True Results was the first person that allowed me to be on its platform. John Crimes was the second. We Are One TV was the third. Kwame Brown was the fourth. Mr. Skinny was the fifth. Now I can add Uncle Suge was the sixth. Armando Black was the seventh. I'm grateful for the opportunities. And I must add the eighth is a Random Black Guy podcast. All of these men were instrumental in me being who I am today. And I just want to say, support these people. Straight Talk TV and Southside, T.Y. Ray, all three of those gentlemen have given me an opportunity to be on their platform and to share with them. And I thank them all. Check out the Telescope page. He's a dynamic young guy. There are so many people out here doing great things. I've seen one or two videos of Moxie Approved and Forgotten Kings. It's people out here really trying to do something, and some of them have been around for a while. Most of us are new, and we're trying to find our way. We appreciate everybody that goes on the journey with us. Thank you again for entering the Tiger's Den. I'm leaving the Tiger's Den. Good night.
This video was made for education and entertainment purposes only. There's no malice or ill intent from the content creator. So please like, share, and subscribe, and have a great evening. Good night.